Welcome to Celebrating Act Two. Celebrating Act Two is the user manual for the second half of your life.
Welcome back. I'm here with my partner, John Coleman, and our contributing editor, John Mariani, on all things gastronomical and otherwise. How you doing,
Welcome,
guys?
John. Good, good. Hey, John. A couple of weeks ago, not too long ago, we did a segment with you about the world wine prices, how they've been overproducing wine, and prices are in a free fall, and that good wine is real cheap. And you just recently wrote an article for Forbes, which is a new wrinkle on that. You had to, if I correct me if I'm wrong, you're selling us that now great restaurants are selling great wines from their wine cellar. Is that true? Explain that to me.
It is really pretty extraordinary. Um, as we all know, across the United States, all restaurants are basically closed, so they are living, if they can, on takeout. Now, you expect this from small little restaurants, barbecue restaurants, hamburger joints, delicatessens, and so forth, but you don't expect it from very high-end restaurants, some of the best in the world, and they're doing it to make a little money, certainly, but they're also doing it because their clientele, they want them back as soon as this is all over, for one thing, and they are the kind of guests who can afford the best things in life. But even affluent people these days probably don't have as much money as they had 3 or 4 weeks ago, or worried what the stock market's going to be doing. So they're not going to go out and splurge and spend $500 for 2 people if they can get that same exact food through takeout, along with a bottle of their favorite wine that they used to spend at the restaurant $150 for, and get it for $75. Now, you're not going to have the tablecloths, you're not going to have the glassware, you're not going to have the maitre d', you're not going to have the busboys and the waiters, you're not going to have the spotlights and so forth, but you will be able to have a glimmer of that restaurant experience. And it's great for the restaurants insofar as, when it comes to wine, a restaurant pays approximately a bit above what we would say the wholesale price. So if they get a bottle for $10, they will price it at least $20. It's rare that is not the case. Sometimes $30, even $40. Some very, very rare wines might be priced astronomically, because they don't really want to sell them. They only have 2 or 3 bottles, but they want to show you, we have this wine on the list. And if you're crazy enough to spend $4,000 for the bottle, you're richer than Croesus or Scrooge McDuck. But it's in that middle ground where the wines would probably have cost about $150, $200, that they are really cutting the prices 25, 50% for wines that are just, let's face it, they're just sitting there. And that is an enormous capital expenditure for any restaurant to stock a very, very thorough, deep, and broad wine list. And especially white wines do not last forever. It's a myth that all wines age well. Only the better reds do, and white wines don't get any better. So if they were shut down for 6 months, even a year, they want to get rid of those wines as fast as possible, because they're not buying new stocks of them.
That's an interesting point. And what they're not buying new stocks because they're not open. They don't have the customers.
Yeah. And also the fact that these things sit in basements or on shelves. They're very well taken care of in terms of humidity and the cool temperatures to keep these capital expenditures at their optimum. So, but unlike when the restaurant is up and running and everybody's having a good time, they may have 1, 2, or more sommeliers in a big fancy restaurant in Las Vegas or New York or California and Chicago. And they also have to have wine buyers, who's usually the sommelier, people who take care of the whole beverage department. So they don't have that expense anymore because these guys are not taking care of the cellar, and they're not coming out and they're not opening the wines with a corkscrew and pouring it and decanting it and doing all those other things, letting you taste it, that the service personnel do. So they can afford to chop the prices and still make as much or more money.
What
So,
a fascinating insight to
so
the
have you
world.
been able to recently pick up any wines that you particularly enjoyed?
Personally, I don't, because I have a pretty extensive cellar myself. My wife and I are good for about the next year and a half if we buy if we drink a bottle a night. So I haven't as a matter of rule, but I do know of specific restaurants and what they're serving, that I can tell you folks about, and the listenership, as to the amazement of what is now out there.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Art. You live near Spago, did you say?
Well, close enough.
Yeah. And they, for instance, I'm going to take my notes out here. They, for instance, at Spago, which is owned by Wolfgang Puck, as you know, and has many, many restaurants around the country. So he has probably an enormous volume of wines, which are bought wholesale and spread out. So in Beverly Hills, which is his flagship, he is they have an offering that ranges from $18 to $650, and most of the wines that they are selling out the door now are between $25 and $100. This is according to their director of wine, Philip Dunn. So their prices, for the most part, are better, or at least the same as most off-premises retailers. Meaning, if you went to a wine store, first of all, you would not be able to get a very old vintage of this particular wine because they don't have them anymore in the store. They don't carry them. And if they did, he's saying that the Spago price out the door is probably going to be less than you would get it at a store, if you, in fact, found it.
Plus
So,
you get a meal along with it. You get a
plus you
meal
get a
along
meal
with
along.
it.
Yeah. So this, I mean, they're selling like Dom Perignon and Champagne and vintage Krug and Laurent Perrier, and they're also selling a great Italian wine, like Angelo Gaia's wines, GAJA, which are always at a premium price and illustrious among the best wines in the United States. And they're selling even those kinds of wines at knockoff prices.
That's amazing. Can you, as an example, Spago, can you go online and see this list of wines that are available? Or
As
did
I
you
did
get that?
in preparation for the article and this, if you go to Spago, they list various alternatives for meals. I think something tells me they run around $59 for the meal, and then they have selected wines every day, which is smart on their part because that means they might have sold out of the Dom Perignon, but this week or today we're offering Krug or something else. So when you call, you will find out which wines they are offering at these various prices. And as you said, they're between the $20 and $100, as opposed to $100 and $700.
Yeah.
There's
So
a also in Europe, by the way. I was talking to the people at the Bauer au Lac in Zurich, Switzerland, which is a very fine 5-star hotel, and they are open, as many hotels are, but their restaurants are closed. So all of their local clientele in Zurich, as well as the travelers who are staying there, they can't actually go down to the restaurant. So they are selling a prefixed dinners, which can be brought to you. And the wines are some of the nicest, loveliest local Swiss wines, which they're selling at rock bottom prices, like 13, 16, 18 euros, which is about 14, 16, $20. And so this is happening all over the world. It's great for all of us.
So the takeaway from this, John, is that we should not be afraid, despite the fact that the restaurants are closed, we should not be afraid to contact our local high-end restaurant and see what they're offering.
Absolutely, positively.
Yeah.
They are
And
also
they,
now there are restaurants at the very high end which have chosen not to go that route because they've tried it. Both my sons are in the restaurant business, and many of those restaurants have just shuttered because they're in New York. They'd have to have a certain staff and so forth. And they tried it with one of them, and they were making what sounds like good money every night just in takeout, but it just wasn't enough to pay the nut. So a lot of restaurants choose not to do this, but a lot more do.
Do you think there's going to be a big shakeout on the high-end restaurants? I don't mean the mom and pops, but the restaurants you're talking about. Do you think there's going to be a big shakeout, a lot of bankruptcies because of the coronavirus shutdown?
There definitely will be, but that's really a discussion for another segment, which I'd be happy to get into because I've been researching that. And there's no question, but the only thing I will say is that it will be terrible. It will seem massive, but the restaurant business especially has always recovered. We were not in World War II. We were not bombed. New York was not bombed by London. London has a very thriving restaurant business and did so after the war in the 1950s and the swinging 60s and so forth. So restaurant sector, you may not have the same restaurants and you may have many different restaurants, but I'll talk about that happily in another segment.
Good. We'll look forward to that. Good. John, thank you. Great insights. And I know a couple of good restaurants in Los Angeles and in San Diego down in La Jolla that I'm going to contact and see what they have to offer. It's a great opportunity.
See what the old Coronado Hotel has to offer.
Yes, you bet.
I'm sure they have a very deep, long list, and they'd love to get rid of that.
Okay. Well, thank you again, John, and look forward to the next segment. Actually, why don't we make that next segment on some of those restaurants and where you think they're going to be in our next segment.
Okay, love to.
All right.
See you all.
See you soon, John. And before we sign off, I want to remind everybody they can sign up for John's free newsletter called the Virtual Gourmet at johnmariani.com. johnmariani.com, the Virtual Gourmet. Great newsletter.
Thanks a lot.
See you guys.
For more on Celebrating Act Two, visit our webpage, follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and tell your friends. Celebrating Act Two is the user manual for the second half of your life.